Hello, and welcome to Raising Your Child on Purpose. My name is Afia Bayayi. I'm a teacher with over 16 years experience teaching children aged 4 to 18 and a parenting coach. I believe that the key to raising a successful child is to raise them to be authentic, resilient, and to have a sense of purpose. My guests will be sharing childhood stories that have impacted their adult life to help us understand why raising children who know who they are, love who they are, and are resilient enough to be all they were born to be is so important. Join me and my guest on this episode of Raising Your Child on Purpose. Today on the show, we've got Afia Bayayi. She's the founder and creative director of Afmena Events. She currently runs her businesses whilst raising her 3 young children who've always been homeschooled. Now, that is very exciting for our listeners, I'm sure. She has a husband of 16 years. He's a pastor, and they pastor together in a Southeast London church where they're based. Now, Afia, welcome.
Hey. Hello, thank you for having me.
Honestly, there's so many things that attracted me to you. And I don't know if my listeners know who you are, but if you guys haven't watched Team Bayayi on YouTube, go and find them. How did that even come about? Because I love it. I love watching your family. You're like the family goals for every...
Oh, bless.
Tell me how Team Bayayi YouTube channel and all of that came about.
Do you know what? It happened during the lockdown. So, during the lockdown, everyone was thrown into having to homeschool. And people in my community knew that I'd been homeschooling. As you mentioned, our children have never been in school. They've always been homeschooled. So I ended up becoming the go-to person. Everyone was asking me for advice and tips, and I kind of got tired of repeating myself. So I said, I'm just going to put everything into a video and I'm going to send it out. And so I think I sat down and I recorded probably about an hour and a half worth of advice, tips, and so on. And my husband, who's like very much an all-round creative, he was like, no one's going to sit down and watch that. You need to break up the information. You need to make it interesting. And so he helped me to chop up the content and to essentially make it more digestible, more interesting. And then he uploaded it onto YouTube. And that was literally how it started. And then from that birthed an Instagram page. And because we developed such a community through that, after the lockdown, we just continued. And literally it's just kind of grown from there.
I have to say, it was definitely one of our lifelines during the lockdown.
Oh, bless.
Just you're there, your family, you're also relaxed and you're giving us all these tips. I just thought, yes, this is what we need. So thank you.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that. That's really encouraging.
No, please keep it up. Definitely, But I was going to say, another thing that drew me to you, and I want my listeners to know this, is that you are a teacher.
Yes,
you are. And the reason why I think that's important is because if you're a teacher, you've been working in schools. How long were you in school for?
I was teaching for 8 years.
Mm-hmm. And then you left the industry and took your kids with you. We want to know this. Know why.
Yeah,
what happened?
Yeah. Do you know what? There were a couple of things that made me really question the education system. I started to feel like I was failing some of my students. And I always give these 2 examples. So I had one class, my specialism was social sciences, particularly psychology. I was head of department for that. And but I also taught health and social care. So I had a health and social care GCSE class, and I had to see them through 5 tasks for their coursework. I had one particular student in my class who was extremely bright, very intelligent, and she'd completed all 5 tasks to an exceptional standard. So she came to a point where she was asking me, Miss, what do I do? And the reality is there was nothing more for her to do. She had done everything she needed to the best of her ability, to a fantastic standard, straight A star. That was before they introduced the number system. So it wasn't A star. And I just sort of had to say to her, can you get on with work from another subject so I can focus on these other students who are not quite, up to speed with where they're meant to be. And I thought, what a shame. I don't have the capacity or the ability. I'm limited in being able to stretch and challenge her. And then on the other side of the spectrum, I had a year 10 GCSE class whereby there were students who came into that class that could not write legibly. And I remember thinking to myself, how on earth have they been able to go through an entire education system from primary school and get to this point, and they're still at this stage? And again, I felt like I was failing, these girls, because how am I supposed to see her through a GCSE? And so, all these things kind of really made me question the education system and whether or not it's really been effective. I felt limited, increasingly limited. I'm one person. I've got a class of 25 plus students. We're dealing with English as an additional language, behaviour management, special educational needs. It's virtually impossible to adequately meet the needs of every single child and fully stretch them and cause them to reach their full potential. Yeah. So I had to then question myself, or ask myself the question, do I want my children to go through this same education system that I have problems with? And especially raising two Black boys. So we have two boys and a girl in that order. Raising two Black boys in Southeast London, I just felt like it wasn't an option, especially, I always say this, I, in my personal opinion, Black boys especially, they don't have the luxury of being average in this country. They have to be excellent to have average opportunities. And I just really wanted to give them the best and make sure that they fully achieved their potential. And I knew I could do that with homeschooling.
I have to say, a few things you said, they really hit me. And you could see my facial expression at one point, where you said, Black boys don't have the luxury of being average. And I think, wow, people will be listening to this and, some people won't get it, but some people will definitely say, I know what you're talking about. In fact, moving on to something else, it's the reason why some or a lot of Black families parent in the way they do that. Knowing we don't necessarily agree with it, but it's that fear of the child being average that causes them to be a lot more intense than they would like to be, isn't it?
100%. Because, there is this mindset that I guess for a lot of them, it's coming from a heart and a place whereby they just want the best for their children, and they don't want them to become a statistic. They don't want them to, become a product of a failed system, because the systems can be a lot less gracious, oftentimes when you are a working class Black boy, especially. And having said that, I don't champion the race card in any way, in terms of I don't allow that to be an excuse. I'm not the type of person that likes to belabor the point when it comes to race-related issues or anything like that. I don't think that should have to always be a filter for everything, that in how we interpret things and how I don't think that's necessary. But at the same time, there is a reality there that I think only if you are a Black person who has, who comes from the diaspora especially, would fully understand and appreciate. And it's important for me as a parent that we equip our children as best as we can, so that in life there can be more doors of opportunities opened to them. So yes.
So, just listening to you, and I know we've spoken before, a few more things are coming to mind, but I'm going to ask this for the people listening. How do you honestly think your decision to homeschool them is making the difference that you want to see? How has that benefited them?
So a couple of things. I think when you are a homeschooling parent, you have no other option but to be intentional with your parenting, because there is nobody else to pick up the slack. And so therefore, it challenges you in such a way whereby you are being excellent and you are striving for excellence, in so many ways. Not to say, and when I say that you are being excellent, it's not perfect, it's not perfection, but excellent in the sense that you are really being reflective, on the impact of what you are doing and how that is, how that is either hindering or that is enhancing your child or your children. You are able to see firsthand your child in different situations and scenarios. I'm there when my children are at nature club, or when they are with their tutors in a particular, for a particular session, or when they're in their small groups or their small classes, for any given subject. I'm there. I might be in the background, but I am there. So I can observe and see how they interact, how they deal with things, how they, process things, how they respond to things. And so I'm able to be a lot more active in helping to build their character. And I'm also, and going back to the point about being intentional, okay, we tried this lesson, the way that I approached it didn't work, or they're just not getting it. So I have to figure out how else to, come at things, or, and just also you associating with other home educating parents and, having those conversations because you're keen to do well for your child, and so, and so learning from them, getting ideas and so it really propels you into this, into this constant desire and constant action of being intentional, of being very deliberate, of being extremely reflective. And the results are that the children end up being a lot more confident. I'm able to speak to my children and say, do you know the way in which you responded in that situation? You know, the way in which you spoke to so-and-so on that day? Let's talk about that, And so because I personally believe that we're not just raising children, we are training them, and training is a lot more deliberate because there is a focus, there is a goal, there is a vision at hand. I'm thinking about their future and working backwards. And again, I want to make it very clear that I'm not trying to mold and shape them to be a particular way, because I believe children are born persons.
Yes.
So I'm trying to understand them, but at the same time, make sure that everything that is in them, the God-given plans and goals and desires for their life are fully realized. And so I see that in action with the children. People say to me all the time, they do seem different. And I think that has a lot to do with it. Another couple of things, I think they're also a lot more free.
Yeah.
They're a lot more free. Because I feel like in schools, if you want to speak, you have to put your hand up. You have to wait for this. You have to, everything is extremely controlled to a certain degree. And I do believe in orderliness. I'm the teacher in me hasn't gone in that respect. I do believe in order. Our God is a God of order. He's not a God of confusion. And so I do believe in order and discipline. But at the same time, I find that they're more free.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes when we're out and about, people aren't used to them just, this whole kind of thing of children are to be seen and not heard, and that type of, but they're just free. Yeah. They're just children. They're, my children, they climb trees, they do cartwheels on the streets and, and I love that. I absolutely love that. And then the final thing is I can see that they are extremely advanced. They are extremely talented. And I know that that has been as a result of the work that has been put in to them, the investment through homeschooling.
The thing is, I hope people listening will really listen to the things you're saying without any assumptions of what you might be meaning, because I know, at least I've watched your family, and it's just such a rich, beautiful thing. And people listening might just think, or maybe they have to be a particular way, or she's making her children into this. But the truth is, I love when you talked about how free they are, because that's what we see. And it's what children are and should be. So I'm going to ask an obvious question, which is, what do you think could have been lost if they stayed in school? And I'm talking particularly from the point of view that they are Black kids, 2 Black boys and a girl. What could have been lost if they stayed in school?
Well, I look at what we cover with our timetable, and there is no way that I would have had the capacity to ensure that they get all of those wonderful, rich opportunities if they were in school. I think the reality is, when they're in school, your time is limited with the children. They go to school, they're there for the majority of the day, they come home, and depending on your work schedule and your work pattern, sometimes you miss each other, you're having to rely on after school clubs. And then, you get into the house, everyone's tired, you've got to have dinner, you've got to do the homework, and it's to bed, and then you're limited to then the weekends, to kind of squeeze everything in, especially if you are a working parent. And so really, the experiences that you get to have as a family are confined to the school holidays, whereas, and so I think that's what would have been lost, because you talked about the richness, and that richness has come about because of the experiences that we've been able to have. And those experiences have come about through time. The time that we've been able to spend together. We go on trips regularly. This month alone, we've been on 4 trips already. We can go on holiday whenever we want to. We don't have to wait for the school holidays, and we can go as often as we want to, also because it's a lot cheaper, because we're not having to be limited to the school holidays. I think those things would have been lost. They are able, our children, they learn instruments. Each of them, so the eldest has 3 instruments, the second one 2, the last one instrument. They learn French, they learn our mother tongues, they go to nature club, they go to chess club, they do sports, they do swimming and gymnastics and all of these things, as well as learning their core subjects, as well as going on trips. And so they literally have the time of their lives. And I think that's what would have been lost, because when you are going to school, you have to plan your life around their timetable, around, do you know what I mean? Around their schedule. Whereas the way that we live our lives is how we want to.
Yeah.
And I think that's incredibly freeing. And I love the relationships that have been established among us as a family unit as a result of that time that we've had. So
how old are they again?
4, 6, and 8. I can't say that anymore because the 6-year-old has just turned 7. He's just turned 7.
My goodness.
But yeah.
4, 7, and 8. And look at how many instruments and all the things they're doing. Oh my goodness. And that's another thing that really attracts me to you, the music side, which we should get to, but I still have more questions about this. Sure. And I'm just going to ask one question that I believe an audience, at least one of the people listening will be asking. They're not in the world as it is. They're not in school. They're not having these experiences that the other kids might be having. They're not having to deal with that on a daily basis. They're at home. Some people might be thinking sheltered from the real world. Are they ready?
So I think I'm so glad you asked that question, because I think it's a misconception that a lot of people have about homeschooling in regards to the idea that you are at home. And I think this is why the word homeschooling has become a bit of a problem issue within the homeschool community. So a lot of people will say, don't use the word homeschool. They say home educating, because the term homeschooling gives the notion that you're just at home schooling all the time, whereas an education sounds a lot more well-rounded, which is what a lot of us is a lot more reflective of the type of lives that we lead. I use the terms interchangeably in terms of homeschooling and home educating. I can't be bothered with all of that. But in terms of that, they are not, I would definitely say that they're not sheltered. So I'll give a few examples. They do attend classes. The classes are just a lot smaller. So, for example, French, chess club, nature club, and every other Friday they attend a home ed meetup where they do arts and crafts activities, and then they get they're working through a book at the moment, and they have discussion sessions around that. Those are all with other children. But the sizes of the groups are a lot smaller, and the parents are involved in the learning experience. That's the only difference. They interact with children of all races. And one of the benefits, which you don't get in school, is that they also interact with children of all ages. So in a classroom, you're only socializing with other children your age. And I could argue that that's not reflective of the real world. Because in the real world, you don't go into a workplace and you're just among peers your age, and whereas, for example, French, they would go into a French, they would have their French group, and they'd have children older than them and younger than them. And that is bringing out all kinds of social skills within them. And so in that respect, socially, absolutely, they don't live in a hole. Home educated children they're not living in a hole somewhere. So our children, they have small groups. And at the same time, they have tutors for other subjects, for example, their music instruments, their sports, and languages. And I like that because I think different teachers draw out different things from them. And oftentimes I'm able to have conversations with certain teachers that they have and certain tutors, and they'll kind of point things out to me, or we can bounce off each other. And that's something I don't take for granted. I do think that they're all able to bring something unique to the table. But the wonderful thing about homeschooling is the relationship that I build with those particular tutors and teachers. It's a lot closer. Yeah. And so I definitely therefore feel that I'm partnering with them when it comes to the learning and the development of our children. And so in that respect, they're not being sheltered, just exposed to me. They are definitely being exposed to other adults, other teaching styles, and other expectations of them, as well as other children. Not to mention the fact that, we are also sociable people. So I think there is oftentimes this, and my brother had this thing when I first said to him, I'm going to homeschool. He was like, it's, in America, it's only weird people that homeschool their children. The children are going to end up weird, what I would say is, if the family is weird, then yes, the children will be weird, but if the family is normal, then the children will be normal. And we are very much a normal family, and we have various social circles that our children are also exposed to, And one classic example is that of our church. So my husband is in the ministry, he's a pastor, and we deal with all sorts in our church. We have young people who've come from gangs, who are in gangs, who, are in and out of gangs, trying to figure out life. And we're working with those people. Our children are exposed to them, so it's not like they live in a bubble at all. And, but I'm so glad that you asked the question, because I do think it's something that lots of people do wonder. And you know what, for that reason, I always make a point of, when I meet people randomly on the streets and the shops, and they say, "Oh, no school today." No, we homeschool actually. and I'm very bold with it. Whereas I know some homeschooling parents shy away from the subject because they kind of just don't want to get into having to explain themselves. But I welcome the conversation, because I want people to see there are people who are homeschooling that are normal, with normal children. And, it's all good.
Yes, no, I agree. Yeah. Would you agree with me? Just be honest. Would you agree or disagree with me that homeschooling isn't for everybody?
Yes, I agree that it isn't for everybody. When I was a teacher, I had students whereby the school was their lifeline.
Oh, wow. I believe that the key to raising a successful child is to raise them to be authentic, resilient, and to have a sense of purpose. So I created a parenting journal and an online parenting course to help parents achieve exactly this. The parenting course and journal cover 5 modules to help you discover your child's authenticity, disciple your child by setting healthy boundaries for them, develop your child's academic and emotional resilience, delve deeper into your past so that you can heal and forgive and be the parent that you want to be. And finally, design a new blueprint for that parent that you so desire to be. If this sounds interesting to you, go to my website, www.raisingyourchildonpurpose.com, to find out more. And use discount code podcast10 to get 10% off the current price. Offer available for a limited time only. Now let's return to the podcast episode.
They came from very toxic homes. So those parents had no business homeschooling. They needed to be out the house as much as possible. So it depends on the home. Absolutely, it depends on the home. And so, no, not everybody should homeschool. But I think if a parent has an interest or a desire to, I always think it's good to explore, because the schools aren't going anywhere. That was always my logic with trying it when we first started. I said, if it doesn't work out for whatever reason, for them or for me, we can always put them in school. Like it's not like they're not, do you know what I mean? And this is what some people do. They homeschool for a certain number of years for a particular reason, and then they put their children in school, or their children are in school and they take them out for a number of years, depending on the child, the situation, and so it doesn't have to be a fixed thing. It can be fluid as well.
Yeah. I love that you said that. And obviously, I'll just remind people that, you definitely put out a lot of resources to help people who are even considering it or going into homeschooling. So there is a lot out there. So we'll put your details at the end just so that people can look at that if they're thinking of it. But let's talk about the parents now who are not going to homeschool, but they want what you have to an extent. They want that intentionality. They want to partner with the schools. They want to be more involved. They want their children. They want the best out of their children. They don't want their children to be left behind or, just left alone when they're excelling. How can those, I guess, very busy parents, and by the way, you're homeschooling, you have your own business as well. Let's not forget that. But how can they keep their kids in school, but still make sure the kids are doing the music and the sports, and they're involved in building their character, and they're free and they're exposed? How can they do that? Is it possible?
I don't think I'm going to be very popular with what I'm about to say next. And it is my personal opinion. But I'm of the belief that you can have it all, but not at the same time.
Okay.
And I think the easiest way to achieve this is if both parents, going by the assumption that you are in a 2-parent household, that is, going by that assumption, is if both parents are not working full time. Yeah. So I do believe that it can be achieved if at least one parent is working part-time, Or if one parent, for example, runs a business like I do, so therefore they can work around the children. I think it's very difficult to achieve if both of you are working, because you are not in control of your time. You do not own your time. And in that respect, I think it makes it very difficult. But if you have one parent who's working full-time, for example, one parent is working part-time or running a business, or perhaps even, let's say, working nights or doing a few shifts in the evening or what have you, I do think it's possible. I'll never forget this. I remember the school that I taught in, there was a deputy head teacher and she was retired. And I remember her having a conversation with one of my colleagues and crying, because she would turn up to work and she would work through the summer holidays. And because she had her son, she would keep him in the car. And she would get so lost in the work that she'd be there for hours. She'd be there for hours. And she just gave her heart and soul, her life to the job. And that's great because, you know, teaching is a profession that makes a difference, and we need teachers who are passionate. I think one of the shames is it's a shame that schools are losing so many passionate teachers because they're overworked, they're underpaid, you know, and so I get it. And I think, you know, there is a lot about that that's commendable. But when it comes to a job, you can very quickly and very easily be replaced. But when it comes to your children, that is my legacy on this earth. My children, that's it, you know, and those are the ones that I'm going to be accountable for before God. You know, that's not something that I take lightly. That's not something that I choose to play with. And so I kind of got to a point when I felt like, here I am invested in other people's children. I need to invest in my own.
Wow. This is, I know, you know, I can just imagine the listeners and some people going, yes, and some people going, oh my gosh, but I'm in a full-time, you know, job and me and my partner. But you know what? I think that, let's be honest with ourselves. You and I did it. Lots of people have done it and are doing it, but we all have our own decisions to make in the end. And you know, I can imagine that those, you know, people, when they leave their jobs, they have less options because there's less income, but also there's, you know, we all make our choices, and I'm happy with mine. And I think you are happy with yours as well. And I, you know, I do hope that people listening are happy with the choices. That's the key thing. I don't want us to ever feel forced. And when people say to me, you're leaving, what are you going to do? I just said to them, the first thing, most important thing for me is that I buy my time back. When I buy my time, I can decide how to sell it.
Yeah. and do you know what, Barrett, you know what you were saying about, you know, just not having as many options because of the decreased income and so on. That really, it honed in on the point that I was making in terms of you can have it all, but not at the same time. Yeah. And I just thought to myself, do you know what? I'm not going to be able to have it all in terms of, the lovely family holiday every single year, and there are certain compromises that we have to make. We're not going to be able to perhaps drive a certain type of car. The Range Rover is not, we're not there yet, but at the same time, we can have that, but just maybe not now. You can have, so you can have it all, but just not at the same time. And I think this is one of the things that's happening is we want to have it all at the same time. Do you know what I mean? When, I'm a Christian. And so when I read the Bible and I look at the Proverbs 31 woman, who is, the description of the ideal woman that many women should aspire to be like, she had servants, she wasn't just doing it all by herself. And so, the idea that we're supposed to work full-time jobs and keep on top of the home, maintain friendships and our relationships with our parents when they get older, they also need us more. And at the same time, be fully intentional with our children and meet all of their needs. And it's not possible. Something has to give. And so I just kind of thought to myself, do you know what? I'm an intelligent woman. No one is going to take my degree or my qualifications away from me. So when I want to, or if and when I want to revisit the career route later on, I can do that.
That's true.
You know, but I can't have it all now. I have to choose. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I agree completely, because we all come to that decision. And for me, I just feel it's a shame when we get there and then we don't make it. You know, I got there, I made a decision, and then I fell back in. And then I'm there again. So, you know, it's a journey. I get that, but it does take a lot of courage. Now, I'm going to bring you to our final question, which I ask all my guests, and I hope you'll be able to, you know, give us some insight into how your childhood, how your upbringing has affected the way you parent today. The good, the bad, the ugly. What about how you were raised is speaking to us right now? I'm hearing your intentionality. I'm hearing your passion. I'm hearing all the stuff that you want for your children and all of that. What can you see in your childhood is playing out now? And I know there'll be good, bad, there'll be ugly, there'll be things that you've changed and dumped and things that you've carried with you. Let's hear it all, because that's what this podcast is about. Tell us.
Sure. So let's start with the negative and then we'll make our way to the positive. Oh my gosh. Okay. So I would say the negative, my dad was very much into education. My dad was a very intelligent person and he wanted to become a doctor, but his parents couldn't afford medical school. So he had to end up being a teacher. And he wanted to ultimately live out his dreams through me. And so I grew up not ever being asked, what do you want to be in life? I was told, no, I don't like that term, what do you want to be in life? What do you want to do?
I agree.
Yeah. So I was asked, I was never asked, what do you want to do in life? I was always told, you're going to be a doctor. So, but then I guess as time went on, it became obvious that that wasn't going to happen. I hated science. I hated maths and I wasn't really into science, but I loved English. And so I had to kind of convince my dad, okay, can I be a lawyer? Because being a Ghanaian parent of his generation, you're either a doctor, a lawyer, or an accountant. There aren't really any other options. And so we had to kind of compromise on being a lawyer. And in the end, I didn't even do that. You know, my heart was to go into teaching, and that really disappointed him and crushed him. And I think, but I just remember growing up with just immense pressure. You know, it was the pressure to perform, you know, to perform in order to, you know, make my dad look good. That's how I felt, you know. And if I ever got an A, it was, why wasn't it an A star? And if I got an A star, how many other people got A stars? You know, and nothing ever felt good enough. And I remember being quite resentful of that, you know. And so so the way that has translated into my parenting is that I want my children to strive for excellence. I have a spirit of excellence in everything I do. And I want my children to have that, but I want them to have it for themselves, you know, not to try and please me or to appease us in any way. I want them to have it for themselves, you know. And so I think that definitely impacted and has impacted my style of parenting and how, you know, how I train my children, how I speak to them. I think also negatively, so I grew up and my mum has 5 children. I've got 4 brothers, but we don't have the same dads. And so we didn't grow up in a home where, and my mum and my dad, they separated when I was quite young as well. So I effectively grew up as an only child. My brothers were back home in Ghana. Then we kind of got to know each other later on in life. And I always craved just the ability to grow up in a family with mum and dad. And I always said, you know, the first man that I'm going to be with, that's going to be my husband. And all my children are going to have the same surname. That was a big thing for me. That was a big, big thing for me, you know. And I loved going to people's homes and seeing a family interact, you know, and watching that, because I didn't have it. And so oftentimes people talk to me about my family, you mentioned like family goals and that sort of thing. And I have to be honest with you, it was all intentional. I'm living the life that I designed. I wanted this. I prayed for it, and it was my heart's desire. And so this is what I yearned for. So this is what I made sure that I created and I had. And not to say that, as I said, I'm a Christian. I give God all the glory. It's not by my own doing. I have to thank God for what I have. But it was, everything has been very intentional about the way in which I run my home. I keep my family. And I think that, so that definitely had a bearing on, and has had a bearing on, the way that we parent, and then I would say the third negative thing is, just money being an issue, money, growing up with my mom being a single parent, I was always aware that money was a problem. We always didn't have. And I want my children to grow up with an abundance mindset, an abundance mentality. So even if it's the case whereby, we can't really afford that this month, my language is different. That's not in the budget this month. It's not that we can't afford it. And even the way that we go about things, my mindset isn't, okay, I can't have that for the children because we can't afford it. My mindset is, how can we afford it?
Yes.
How can we make it happen? Because this is what I want for them, and this is what I want us to do, or this is where I want us to go. So how can we afford it? So, and I want them, and I'm very intentional about that, because I want them to have an abundance mindset, that there's nothing that they cannot do. There's nothing that is beyond their reach of ability, so I would say those were the negatives that kind of stand out. But in terms of positives, I think my mom especially was extremely affirming. She would say to me, you can be the next Oprah Winfrey, and she was extremely affirming. And because of that, I've always been a very confident person.
Yes.
And I think confidence is such a key, especially when you're raising Black children. Yes. I find I don't want my children to ever walk into a room and be conscious of themselves, and almost be apologetic. I don't want them to walk into a room and with I'm sorry. I want them to walk into a room. You're welcome. You're welcome. Hello. My name is, what's your name? And so, and that, my mom especially was extremely affirming to me, with her words, and, and that confidence is something that I've definitely, I want to see in my children. And so I'm really, careful with speaking words of life, words that build them up. We do not allow negative, speech. The words I can't is banned in my house. You can say, can you help me, please? But you can't say I can't, things like that, So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
It more than answers the question. Honestly, Afia, this has been so enlightening. Or one of the key things, in fact, if there was one word I heard throughout, is intentionality. You are so intentional in everything you do. And just the stories you told at the end just shows that it's possible, whatever your upbringing was like. And sometimes people feel like, I don't have, and therefore I'm doomed, or my kids. But the truth is, you can create what you want out of life. You can give your children what you didn't have. You just have to be aware of, where you've come from. I think that's important, and be intentional about where you want to go. It's been such a pleasure, Afia. Honestly, thank you so much for giving us your time. And I'll remind our guests to go and look you up, Team Bayayi on YouTube, and also Afmena Events, because I know that's doing very well as well. Thank you very much. Any final words, even if it's a bye-bye, anything?
Oh my gosh. No, just thank you so much. And I think, if there is anybody that is considering homeschooling, if it's an idea, an interest, explore that. Life is too short, so at least give it a try and see how you go. And, give me a shout. I'm really good with my messages and that sort of thing. So give me a shout if you need any advice or help. I'll be more than happy to help.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to Raising Your Child on Purpose podcast today. Remember to visit my website at raisingyourchildonpurpose.com and use discount code podcast10 to get 10% off my online parenting course and the journal. You can also follow me on Instagram at abiara.bolu, where I post tips and videos regularly to help you raise authentic and resilient children who have a sense of purpose.